Alrighty, well, thank you all for joining us today. This is the October iteration of the Housing Department's monthly community engagement series. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about proposed changes and updates to the city's inclusionary housing ordinance and the downtown high-rise program. And in just a moment, I'm going to turn this over to Eric Sullivan, the Director of Housing for the City of San Jose. But before I turn it over to Eric, I just want to go over a couple of quick logistical details here. If anybody would like to ask questions, we ask that you use the chat feature and you can send your questions to me. It's listed as HSG webinar, housing webinar, and you can chat directly with me. You can send your questions to me and I will ask those questions of Eric, or we have several other staff members on this Zoom call, and so we'll route it to the appropriate person to answer it for the entire group. So again, please send those questions via chat to me. My name is Jeff, but for purposes of this Zoom, I'm HSG Webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Sullivan, our Director of Housing.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. And we'll go through today the initial draft of proposed changes to primarily the regulation side of the inclusionary housing ordinance, but also some amendments to the existing ordinance per response to council direction received during the March and June budget message as adopted by council. So I'll flip through providing a quick summary of first, here's how the program has performed over the last 5 years. Then what are some of the proposed changes to the ordinance in response to the direction from mayor and council? And then we'll wrap it up with a quick summary of the proposed amendments and edits to the IHO regulations, as we'll be publishing a draft for public view here in the next couple of weeks. But we wanted to begin the dialogue today through this community meeting. So Jeff, do you want to share the presentation and we'll begin going through it?
Okay, just give me 1 second.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we'll begin here as this is going to go through primarily the inclusionary housing ordinance. We're not going to get into the downtown high-rise sort of updates. We'll leave that to a later consideration. So go to the next slide, please. So first here on the inclusionary housing ordinance updates, I'll begin by going through a quick history and the recap as this program transitioned from the Affordable Housing Incentive Fund, or the AHIF Fund, and then became the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance back in 2019. And so the next slide here just quickly captures, so I'll first begin here. Let's start with the June budget message. So in the March and June budget message, mayor and council had directed to find ways to streamline the IHO process and how what is now the Department of Housing receives initial applications. We process that application, hand it back to PBCE to move forward. They move forward with their side of a deal. We receive it back to finalize the affordable housing compliance plan. And so what are ways in which internally within the housing department, we can streamline those processes? That is one of the ways we looked at in looking to revise the existing IHO regulations. Two, we wanted to figure out different ways in which we can further incentivize the use of rather dormant provision within the IHO regarding surplus credits. And so we came up with an idea grounded in a lot of the data analysis that had led to and fostered the creation of the regulatory updates as well as kind of the ordinance updates. And so we'll talk a little bit about how that idea is being brought forth for putting some muscle behind the surplus credit exchange that already exists in ordinance. Three, we're going to make some revisions to the AMI band applicable to this program per council direction. expanding it out to 60% and then all the way up to 100%, 20% of AMI, which just about captures a lot of the affordable units kind of being brought online. And given where the AMI levels are in the city of San Jose as a family of four, is now at 100% AMI at $195,000 per year for the household. Our AMIs continue to rise, which creates challenges as well as some opportunities. And then we'll talk lastly here about how we're going to exempt 100% affordable housing projects out of the IHO. The past practice has been for those projects that were not directly subsidized by the city, they still had to go through an IHO process, which didn't quite make a lot of common sense. And so we're going to be exempting those projects, and I'll talk through that process here next. So on the next slide here, it gives a quick summary as to what has been the prior program performance data. So as I mentioned, from 2019 to 2025, that's our period of review, what we're now going to refer to as sort of IHO phase one, as we're going into this phase two section of the IHO, looking to make process and policy improvements. During that period of time, from 2019 to 2025, over 400, about 400 total applications came in for review, but only 43, so just about 10% of those projects actually got built. And out of those 43 projects, or 10% of the total applications that came in, just about 1,400 units were built, which roughly equivalates to about 288 units a year over the 5-year period. And then breaking down those 43 projects that actually got built a little further, we see just about 28 of those projects built affordable units. And you can see kind of where the AMI band breakdown was for those units, with the majority, over 56% of them, primarily prefacing unit creation for the band of 60% to 120% of AMI. The other 15 projects paid into an in-lieu fee. So over this 5-year period, the city collected about $47 million in in-lieu fees, but the overwhelming majority of that fee came from just 5 projects. And so some of our key takeaways in looking at this program performance data was that this program is certainly promoting and supporting more workforce housing at the affordability range at 60% AMI and above, that developers strongly favor building units. So we want to find more ways to encourage the building and development of more units, and they prefer that unit creation rather than paying in lieu fees. And then 3, program unit production pretty much parallels our department's gap financing program for deeply affordable units, where we produce just about 300 units a year through our various gap financing programs. So together, if we are able to make process improvements that speak to developer needs, we could potentially energize more production of housing units, which is our end goal. And so the next slide here gets into more of the details about what it is we're proposing in terms of ordinance changes. So first, as I mentioned, per direction from Mayor and Council in the June and March budget message, we are increasing the band of the AMI and focusing it more on the workforce sector, moving the band from what was 50 to 100% to 60 to 110% of AMI, which, as the data has shown, that's where the majority of the units were being built anyway. And then really beginning to think about, on the for sale side, how do we look at ways by increasing the AMI level to 120, as we see roughly about 4 or 5 different for sale projects that come through the program, an application, not necessarily being built, on an annual basis. And so this adjustment to the AMI blend reflects the council direction received in March and June. The next slide then gets into, oh, go back a slide here. I think we skipped one there. Yep, so the next slide after that. Okay, so then the next slide here just gets into sort of the streamlined process for 100% affordable developments. Included in the March and June budget messages was to find ways in which we can further the development and expansion of already restricted affordable units. And I'll talk about what's an example of that. We have seen an uptick over the last 2 years of projects that are fully market rate, that are not being subsidized by the city, that do not have low-income housing tax credits in it, but are targeting an AMI range of 60 to roughly 100% AMI. Although they are coming in as deed restricted affordable, they were still having to go through the traditional IHO process. And so what we're going to look to do with those projects that are already accepting deed restrictions, that are 100% or below an AMI targeted for households, so these are affordable units for workforce, is to streamline them pass through by the provision of just a regulatory agreement. So that way, as the projects come from PBCE, they check their door, PBCE sends them to the housing department. We can quickly turn them around with a standard regulatory agreement for them to sign without having to go through the entire IHO Affordable Housing Plan compliance process. We can give them an AR to continue their process forward at PBCE. And in addition to that, we are going to look at the affordability period for rental inclusionary units, benchmarking it to 55 years, which is where state law currently is for the majority of the affordable housing programs, thereby creating alignment between local and state law on the affordability restrictions. And so those are the proposed ordinance changes. And now in the next slide here, we'll get into an area of the existing ordinance that has not really had much sort of muscle and energy behind it. And we want to try to put forth a program to give this area of the ordinance some life and see if it works. And so what we're looking to do is right now in existing ordinance, if a developer builds more units than they are required to under their plan, which as we saw from the data on the past 5-year performance, majority of developers want to just build the units rather than pay an in lieu fee. If we can get more surplus units on the affordability scale, which is now going from 60% to 120% of AMI, they can use and get a credit for those additional surplus units above and beyond what their affordable housing compliance plan had required. And we can effectively bank those surplus units to then use going forward into the next project, or create an opportunity where the housing department will establish an exchange where they can exchange those units to other developers who are building other projects in the city. The end goal for the creation of this and this proposal for a surplus credit program is to get to a more abundant housing stock. And where could we provide another tool within the plethora of tools in the existing toolbox for mixed compliance plans that come under the IHO to further incentivize developers to continue to build in San Jose. And so the next slide gets into sort of how we're envisioning the setup of this program, which is, number one, we want to make sure that as the surplus credits are entering into the exchange, that we're focused on equivalency and transferability. Meaning, on the equivalency side, we want to make sure that we're matching unit types. If we have a surplus 1-bedroom unit, we want to make sure that that is traded or credited towards another surplus 1-bedroom unit, and we're not getting inequality in bedroom sizes of trying to exchange a studio for a 3-bedroom, as an example. So there's equivalency in the types of units and unit size. And then 2, transferability. We would want to target to ensure that as with a broader band of 60% AMI to 120% AMI, we want to make sure that a 1-bedroom unit that's at 70% AMI is being exchanged for a 1-bedroom unit of similar AMI range. And so we've bucketed the ranges on 60 to 80 and then 81% up to 120 to create some transferability of the units that also encompasses some equivalency of the unit types and household income targets. And so some of the benefits that we foresee in this light setup of a regulatory plan for giving this section of the ordinance some life is that it creates some flexibility for developers to encourage them to build more affordable units today, where market conditions may be more favorable for the production of more units, and then be able to take that credit later on when market conditions and financing opportunities may be less favorable. Two, it presents an opportunity for more efficiency, as it'll be easier to balance sort of how projects get done. And since this is another tool in the toolbox for projects looking at mixed compliance, it creates a complementary lane to existing mixed compliance opportunities. And then third, it incentivizes and creates more opportunities to synchronize with the shifts in capital markets on any given day, and thereby looking at better ways to link our land use policy requirements to existing capital markets and figuring out how do we foster a more abundant housing stock. And so on the next slide, this is a quick summary of just the regulatory updates that we'll be doing. So what I mentioned before in the first couple of slides is here are changes to the ordinance, followed by here is an area of existing ordinance that we're going to give some regulatory life to by establishing this exchange. And now this is a quick summary of the streamlining we have done on the regulation side for the IHO program. Number one, we have cleared pathways for selecting compliance options. If you want to come in and do your traditional compliance plan and consider some mixed compliance options, that process will get streamlined, much clearly articulated within the regulations. So as you interact with staff, it is a much more efficient conversation about how do we get your project to move forward into construction. So that way we can turn that existing application rate of projects that become built from 10% to hopefully closer to 50% or even higher. Two, we're going to look for and provide more detailed guidelines for compliance options. So as you consider the various ways in which to utilize the tools within the mixed compliance or in straight compliance program, it is much clearer to understand and to factor those options into your performance. Three, we're going to provide more visual exhibits to better illustrate some of the requirements under the IHO program, as the ordinance sometimes has areas of gray, and we want to clarify those areas of gray so we can have a more efficient execution. Number five, we're looking at ways in which we can interactively calculate for obligation estimates, meaning as you look at how do I achieve my 5%, 10%, 15% compliance across the broader AMI band, how you can better calculate those options and how can the department help facilitate that, including the new tool we will add around surplus credits, so that as you're processing through the department, it becomes more predictable, it becomes more consistent, and it allows for more opportunities to get to yes on how to further your project. And lastly, we're going to have more ready-to-use templates, applications, and agreements, so that each time an application comes through, you're seeing a more standard, consistent, predictable set of forms and processes in order to complete your entire compliance project and plan in a much more efficient and timely basis. These changes reflect the housing department's overall focus on recognizing that time is money, and how do we ensure that as you bring your projects forward, we are able to further the advancement of those projects into construction. And so that is a quick summary of our proposed inclusionary housing ordinance and regulatory changes. And now, Jeff, I can open it up to questions, and we can take down the slide there.
All right, Eric, thanks for the presentation. All right, just to reiterate, as I said at the beginning, if you'd like to ask questions, please use the chat function and send your questions to me. I'm listed as HSG Housing in the chat, and if you send your questions to me, I will read them off for Eric and the other staff members to respond. Okay, first question here. How would rents at the levels proposed compare with rents of the units under the existing policy and with current market rents? Will the housing, and then actually there's a second part to that, Eric. Will the housing department produce this analysis before the ordinance change comes to HCDC and the city council?
So if I understand the question, HCD has already updated its rents related to the AMI schedules. That updated AMI schedules tied to the AMI levels, 50, 60, up to 120% AMI, is already on our website.
Okay, and then I don't know if the first part of this person's question is how the rent levels, the proposed rent levels compare with the rent levels in the existing policy. And are you saying that it's all based on the numbers provided to us by HCD?
Correct. So the AMIs track to the rent levels track to those AMI levels. That's how we set affordability at the 60, 70, 80, 120% of AMIs. There are rents that we can pull from prior projects, but we just have rents at time of application, not rents at time of permanent operations of the buildings. Therefore, the best data set, and it's already available on our website, is where those existing AMI levels for rent schedules were in 2019, all the way history through up to current 2025.
All righty. Next question. 110% AMI is very close to market rent for new construction. How is the city ensuring that the IHO yields a public benefit measured in terms of lower rent than other units in the building or the average rents?
So as we've seen from the past performance data over the last 5 years, the majority of projects are producing units rather than paying in lieu fees, and those units skew towards 60% AMI and above. Roughly 56%, 57% of the total of the small number of projects that actually progress forward targeted 60% in AMI and above. The balance, roughly 44%, 45% in that range, were 50% of AMI. So the program as it exists in its current form is providing supports for workforce housing units at the higher AMI bands. What is proposed today and what we'll be bringing forward to council under the direction from council is to expand that band to 60 to 120, and then two, figure out how do we streamline the overall processing of applications so we can raise the total number of applications that go into construction. And then three, how do we flex some existing ordinance language regarding surplus credits to provide yet another tool to achieve mixed compliance?
All righty, there are quite a few questions here. The next one, has this type of exchange, as you described, been done in any other cities? And if so, do you know how it's worked? And are there specific cities that we are learning from as we're proposing these changes to the IHO?
There are a few other cities that have taken a similar type of exchange, though all exist in different forms. None of them are identical to our IHO program, as each city has variations of their own IHO program. In addition, and examples of other exchanges may not fall under a city's IHO program. It must be fall up under sort of the ways in which they incentivize affordable mixed income developments. So yes, we have looked at other city models. None of them, again, match identical to how the city's IHO program works. But in general, the theory here, since this is existing language within the ordinance, is how do we utilize this tool to advance and incentivize additional production of units today, where market conditions may be more favorable, as opposed to tomorrow, where market conditions may be less favorable. In total, again, a very low percentage, 10.6% of the total applications that come in through the department over the last 5 years even get to construction. Our objective and the direction from council was to identify ways in which we can streamline the program so we can get to more housing units being produced. One thing that is clear from the data over the last 5 years is that the majority of developers want to produce the units, which is great. How do we incentivize and further that production of units to get to a broader affordability schedule.
Okay. For the initial surplus credit program, are there restrictions on the building or product type for transferability, assuming the bedroom count and affordability levels are similar? For example, could we take the credit from a stacked flat condo project and apply it to a townhome project?
No, so a stack flat condo project and a townhome project that doesn't get to equivalency test. As we see different examples within this exchange, once it is established and approved by mayor and council, we'll make adjustments to the regulations. The attempt here is to take what is a dormant component of the existing ordinance, put some life into it, provide it as an incentive, and see what the uptick is. If there is uptick that creates scenarios where stacked flats and townhouses are trying to do exchanges, we'll have to consider that under our two primary objectives of equivalency and transferability to see whether or not it gets to proper utilization of the program as is intended.
Okay. Next question is kind of a follow-up to a previous one. This gets into the current affordability levels and the proposed changes to the affordability levels. Will the analysis of these rent differences be provided to the city council and to HCDC? Not HCD, as I may have said before, but will the analysis of the differences be provided to the city council and HCDC?
Again, I think similar to my response to the prior question, the rent schedule is set by HCD. So they assign at 60% AMI, here's your rents. And what is that schedule? Based on 0 studios all the way through to 5 bedrooms. So that schedule is set by HCD. That is the schedule that rents are set for compliance with the program going back to 2019 to current. So that schedule is already published online. If not, Jeff and the team will make sure that is up, and you can see what the differentials are in those rents.
All right. The next one, someone asked if the content from today's meeting is going to be shared online. And I'll just take this quick moment to say yes. I just sent out a link in the chat. So all the content from our previous meetings is at that link. And the content from today's meeting will be added. Usually takes us a couple days to get it up, so it'll probably be up next week. And the link that I just sent is where you can find all that information, including the presentation Eric went through. And you will also, the attendees at today's meeting will also receive an email with that link once all the new content is live. So just wanted to make sure you guys were all aware of that. So we put transcripts of the meeting, video of the meeting, as well as the presentation from the meeting up on our website. So all that stuff is available to you anytime. Okay, next question. Follow-up question about the credit program. Question is, can we transfer the credit from one project to another if they reside in different districts in San Jose? Also, assuming the unit type and AMI levels are similar.
Right. So long as it meets the transferability and equivalency test, yes. As the program gets utilized and we see different iterations of the different projects, we may revise the regulations in terms of that use. Before this initial startup period for this program that we're announcing, again, existing ordinance, putting some energy into it, we're going to allow for that, and let's see how the program evolves.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions? I think I went through the initial batch of questions that I had received, but I don't want to cut anyone off. So if anybody else has a question, please put it in the chat to me. I'm listed as HSG webinar in the chat. Okay, looks like we do have a couple more. Next question. In order to move the needle, this person writes, the city needs to take steps to lower the percentage significantly from 15 to 10% or lower. Are there any discussions to drop the percentage to alleviate the pressure on developers?
So there are various programs through the incentives, either growth areas incentive or downtown area incentives that makes adjustments to the schedules related to the percentage of total units that need to be affordable. In addition, I will note that existing AMI schedules at 110 AMIs and up to 120 AMIs, there are very few projects units at this point in the city that exceed those rent schedules. Right now, the city of San Jose is in a position where our max affordability, 110%, 120% AMI rents exceed our market rate rents. If you look through the department's published quarterly reports, you can see the trend line as to total average rents across all unit types, and then compare that to where existing HCD schedules for 110 AMIs and 120 AMIs, you will see that as an example, two bedrooms at 110 AMI is roughly $4,900 per unit, which is above where most market rate rents are today. So we're in a unique space within San Jose and our current market conditions based on our ever increasing AMIs, area median incomes for the city, and then where we're at in terms of production of units and where those rents are not able to continually grow. And so that's why we see this opportunity and changes to the AMI ban as to get more projects moving forward that are providing more workforce housing units and getting to more abundant housing stock.
Okay, next question. Why consider reducing the period of affordability when it can be challenging to preserve the affordable units we already have?
I'm sorry, can you restate the question, Jeff?
Yeah, I'll just read it verbatim.
Yeah.
Why reduce the period of affordability when we will already be struggling to preserve the affordable units that will be expiring soon?
So if I understand the question correctly, it goes to concerns expressed regarding existing units that have expiring affordability restrictions, or I would say more specifically to low-income housing tax credit restrictions, as the majority of the city-funded projects have affordability restrictions, therefore restricting rent levels to 55 years or more. So in regards to the question regarding expiring low-income housing tax credit projects, the city, we have done here in the housing department about 5 to 8 transactions just in this calendar year, so January through September, that are resyndications or extensions out or recapitalizations of existing low-income housing tax credit buildings in order to extend out or maintain their existing affordability restrictions and then extend out their useful life through recapitalizations, and then also resyndications of those credits for an additional 15-year period to provide a capital infusion into those projects. So with that continuing work, this work we're looking to bring forward under the IHO is focused on how do we look at ways in which to encourage more production of units. And as we continue that conversation, where do we look at ways in which existing buildings that may have vacancy, that may pursue conversions from commercial into residential, thereby adding total units to the amount of housing stock within the city, how do we encourage some of those reuse projects as well? But coming back to kind of the focus of this conversation today, which was how do we take the IHO, streamline it to allow for quicker execution on the developer side? 2, where do we look for ways in which to better utilize existing language in the ordinance around surplus credits? And then 3, how do we create an opportunity to expand the AMI ban to hopefully get that 10% conversion rate of application to build projects much, much higher so we can get to more abundant housing stock within the city.
Okay, next question. Is there a concern that the affordability requirements may be at a level that could discourage development? Is there potentially a sweet spot with a lower requirement that spurs enough development to produce more units overall?
So again, I think if I understand the question, our AMI levels right now exceed, as I mentioned, the rents underneath those AMI levels exceed the overwhelming majority of market rate projects. Right now, we need to get to, as Council had discussed earlier this year, in 2024, we had zero market rate building starts. This year, we have had over 1,000 units move forward under our growth areas incentive programs. So under existing financial market conditions, where the city can either provide an incentive or to streamline and reduce the cost of holding a project and getting it through the approval process system, thereby acknowledging sort of the time value of money today as opposed to tomorrow. Where do we streamline some of that work to reduce some of that holding cost in order to get more units out of the ground? This work that we're proposing under this IHO ordinance will achieve some of those goals, streamlining your processing through the housing department so you can move through more quickly through PBCE and get to entitlements or into permitting. And two, applies another tool to add to the toolbox around different ways in which to get to mixed compliance. And since our AMI ban and overall schedules above market rate rents, we're hopeful that this project, again, given mixed compliance options, given options around surplus credits, given options around how do you get to compliance through the downtown incentive program or the growth areas incentive program, which cuts or eliminates fees, these changes proposed in the IHO advances our work around getting to more, hopefully, abundant housing stock and encourages more continuing investment in the city.
All right, just want to call everyone's attention to the chat. Our Deputy Director, Sarah Fields, just posted a link where you can find housing market reports, data reports that come out quarterly that we, the Housing Department, share with the community. And so those are open to all. So if you ever want to see those, you can go to the link that Sarah just sent and just know that we will continue to update those every quarter. We'll be adding the newest data, the newest report. Let's see here. And I think we have gone through all the questions, but before I let Eric go, again, just one more final call. Anybody else have any questions for Eric? If so, please drop it into the chat to HSG Housing or HSG Webinar, and I'll read that question for Eric. Going once, going twice. All right. I think that's it. Eric Sullivan, the Director of Housing, thank you very much for sharing your time and your expertise. To all the attendees, thanks for attending. And again, you will be receiving an email from me in the coming days once all this material is up on our website and available for you to view. And I think with that, we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.